Good morning. As we go to the Chumash of today, we're holding Pash Mitzeda, and we go to the laws of we are in the laws of Tzadas, and then the Torah is going to go into the laws of Tum and Tada, very difficult laws in the Torah laws, the laws of Zav and Nida. We are very complicated laws. But we'll start off with the Torah ends off the laws of Tzadas. So we're holding on chapter 14, verse number 54. These are the laws of every kind of lesion of Tzadas, Nesek, and to a Nesek. Tzadas Abeged, the laws of a Tzadas of a garment, Abayis, and Tzadas of a house. Any kind of seis and sapachas, all of beheres, so these are all different kind of color shades of a tzadas. Well, the hard is being matome, will be matar to render decision. The day the person is impure and the day the person becomes pure, zeis teres tzadas. This is the law of a tzadas. Or we just read in Pash Tazria and Mitzvah. The hard is being meaning to determine which day is rendered clean and which day is rendered unclean. Only in chapter numbers 15, verse number 1. God spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, speak to the Jewish people, all right, and tell them, Ish, any man, if he has a discharge from his flesh, his discharge is unclean. So Rashi says one might think that if any kind of a discharge from any place of the body, he becomes unclean. Scripture therefore says from his flesh, which meaning not all flesh. Since Scripture makes a distinction between flesh and flesh, I'm entitled to reason that it renders unclean man who does a discharge, a clean man who has a discharge, and it renders unclean a woman who has a discharge. Just as a woman who has a discharge is from a very place is from a very place in her body, from which she becomes unclean, with a minor degree of uncleanness, namely a nida, that she becomes unclean from a menstrual cycle, doesn't see her nose is running. She becomes unclean with a major degree of uncleanness, namely ziva, a flow outside the menstrual cycle. Likewise, in the case of a man who has a discharge from the very place in his body, from which he becomes unclean with a minor degree of uncleanness, namely a balkeri, a seminal discharge. He becomes unclean, a major discharge, and a ziva. So you have, in the Torah, you have two kinds of discharges, from a man and from a woman. A woman that becomes a nida is one level of impurity, and then there's a woman who comes as zava. So too the man who has a seminal discharge, he becomes a balkeri. There's one level of tuma, impurity, and then there's a higher level of impurity if he has another kind of a discharge. Now, these are very difficult colored shades of blood and discharges, colors, which today actually do not know the difference between a nida and a zava, and therefore we take the stringencies of both of them. But these are very difficult laws, and today we don't have the exact color configuration between a menstrual cycle and a zava, a discharge after one's menstrual cycle, or a man who has a seminal discharge, and then he has another colored kind of a discharge. So this is the difference between a nida and a zava. So that's a menstrual and seminal emission. Both cause a minor degree of uncleanliness, one that does not require 7 clean days before purification, as opposed to the cleanliness of discharge of a zav or zava. So really, a nida, a menstrual discharge of a woman, it doesn't require 7 days. The second at night, after she becomes pure, she can go to mikveh. But today, all women count 7 days before they go to the mikveh. because we put the law of a zava and a nida together today. But in the days bygone, times of the sages in the biblical times and the times of the Beis Hamikdash, they would have had the capability to make the differentiation between a nida and a zava. But today we don't do that. Zoive tamayu, apart from the discharge rendering a man unclean, this teaches us that the discharge itself is unclean. And even if one drop defiles on other people and vessels. What is the difference between a discharge and a semen? A male discharge resembles the moisture that separates itself and appears barely dough, like barley dough. And it's a thin liquid, resembling white of an unfertilized egg, where semen is thick, like white of an egg, which is muzeres. So you have to be able to see between the difference of color between a balkeri of a man and a zoiv, between a nida and a zava. This shall be the nature of his uncleanness, due to this discharge. That's coming out of his flesh. As or if his flesh is plugged up by this discharge, that is uncleanness. So that's the expression real saliva, which flows from the flesh, as like saliva, which comes out clear. That the discharge becomes out thick, and thus seals up the orifices of the member, so that the flesh is plugged up. This madrasa explained, however, is as follows. The verse 2 counts 2 perceptions of discharge and calls them unclean. It says a discharge from his flesh, a discharge is unclean. Then the verse number 3 says, counts 3 perceptions of discharge and calls them him unclean. And it says, and they shall be the nature of his uncleanness due to his discharge. If his flesh runs with his discharge, or if his flesh is plugged up by his discharge, this is his uncleanness. Now, how is this so? 2 are for the uncleanness, and the third one requires him to bring a sacrifice. Verse number 4. Of any bedding with which the man with the discharge will lie, or shall become unclean. Any object upon which he sits shall become unclean. Now it says anything fitting for bedding. One might think that this would include even to be designated for any other purpose. Scripture therefore says upon which a man will lie. It does not say upon which the man lay in the past tense, rather in the future tense, will lie, which is always designated for this. It excludes this object about which to say to him, give up and let us do a work which the purpose was designated. So in essence, you have to be that the bed sheet was designated as a bed sheet, not as something else. Ashayesha, just like the case above the bedding, it does not say upon which he sat in the past, but upon which he will sit. Thus referring to the article that is always designated. That means a chair that is designated as a chair. If this chair was designated as something else but a chair, then the guy used it as a chair. It was some kind of designer piece, and he used it as a chair. It's not considered a chair. We are talking about something that is always designated to be made as a chair or as a bedding. Verse number 5. Any man touches his bedding, he must immerse his garments, and he himself has to go to the mikveh. The laws of purity and impurity are very difficult laws. And today we don't have to worry about these laws because we don't go to the Beis Hamikdash. But in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, these were extremely important laws to know these laws, because you couldn't go to the Beis Hamikdash. Because if you couldn't go, if you became impure, either yourself or by touching somebody that was impure, Or by touching even his chair that was impure, you became impure. Person had to be really, really in focus of what he touches and where he goes and who he hangs out with. The Rashi says the man who touches his bedding, this teaches us that the uncleanness of the bedding is more stringent than the uncleanness touch of the object. And so far, a bedding or a seat becomes avatuma, a major source of uncleanness, which can defile a person to render his garments unclean. We're touching the object, which is not the bedding. This object becomes a vlad hatum, a secondary source of uncleanness, a degree less than abatum, which defiles only food and drink, but not people or objects. As I said, so there are many shades, many degrees in tumah. There's what's called the avatuma, a father of impurity, which automatically impurifies everything else. And then there's a vlad, there's a child of impurity. And there's many levels of tumah, rishul tumah, shein tumah, shlish tumah. These are extremely difficult laws. But an avatuma, as Rashi is saying, the Gemara is saying, that if a person, a zav, is avia veisatuma, he's the ultimate level, he's totally impure, the person who has a zav, he sits on something, a vessel, a chair, that becomes an avatuma. And that can make a rishul tumah. That can make everything that it comes in contact with him tummy. Another person. A vlad tumah, rishul tumah can only cannot impurify another human being. Can impurify food. Verse number 6. If somebody sits on this object, that the zav sat upon, he himself has to immerse his clothes in the mikveh. But also, and he himself has to go to the mikveh. But Tommy he's unclean until the evening. So Rashi says, if anyone who sits on this object, even if he did not touch it, or even don't show with his hand, he sat down with his back, so he didn't touch it with his hand. Doesn't make a difference. Even if there were 10 objects, one on top of the other, and the man with the discharge had sat on top of one, all then, even the bottom seat, becomes defiled because of Moshe, the law of uncleanness concerning seating. Thus, just as a man with the discharge of the bottom of the seat of the pillow without touching it, so too a clean man can become defiled by the bottom seat without even touching it, because he sat a bunch of pillows. So he didn't touch the actual seat. He was sitting on 10 pillows. Doesn't make a difference. Everything that's on the seat, all the 10 pillows become impure, and it impures the person that's sitting on top of these 10 pillows. Again, these are the laws of tum and tara. You cannot see the difference in the person. This is the concept of spiritual impurity, which is today. We are all impure. We are all basically impure people. And that's why we need to have a Mashiach comes. We'll all need to have to go through the paraduma and go through these levels, this concept of purity, to be able to go to the Beis Hamikdash. Anyone who touches the flesh of a man with the discharge, Yechab is begotten, he becomes impure. It means I shake the hand of a guy. The guy tells me, I'm sorry to tell you, but I'm a zav. Now I shook his hand, I become impure. With Tommy Adar. And now I cannot go to the Beis Hamikdash for today. If I was on my way to the Beis Hamikdash and I shook this guy's hand, I now become impure. I gotta go back home. That's why there was a sign in the Beis Hamikdash saying, are you sure that you are pure? You know, who did you touch? Who did you come in contact with? Because you can find, and I understand why a person comes back to the Beis Hamikdash and then find out later that he was impure. Right? He comes to the Beis Hamikdash, and then he talks to the guy you met a day ago. The guy told him, I want to tell you I was observed. But meanwhile, I went to the Beis Hamikdash, and I was impure. because I touched you, because I gave you a handshake. Verse number 8. If a man with a discharge spits upon a clean person, so that person has to go to the mikvah. So Rashi says, and he touches it or lifts it up without touching it. For the saliva defiles it, lifts up, he picks it up the saliva, it becomes impure. Verse number 9. Excuse me. Any rider gear. Those days the traveling was on a donkey or on a horse. So now the riding gear becomes impure. Even though he did not sit up on an example, the saddle bow called arkan in French became unclean because of the mark of the riding gear. However, the saddle itself, called alvas, no French, a broad board connecting the two upright of the saddle, according to the saddle girth, belly band, becomes unclean because of Moshav, because it became a seat. Even though it's a saddle, it's not a normal seat, but it becomes the concept of a seat concerning riding a horse or a donkey. Whoever touches anything that'll be under him, Yitma Ada Arev, he becomes unclean until the evening. Somebody who lifts anything that the Zav touched, he has to go to the mikveh, he has to bring his clothes to the mikveh, and he becomes impure until the evening. These are all the laws of a Zav. This is talking about a man's discharge. We'll soon get to the woman who has a discharge, but right now the Torah is talking about a man. Says, shall a Zav under the man with his discharge. The verse comes to teach us about riding gear, that anyone touches it becomes unclean. He is, however, not required to immerse his garments. This feature is a symbol of a mishkav opposed to a merkav. Any of the items mentioned above in this passage discusses the laws of a man with a discharge, namely his discharge, his saliva, his semen, his urine, the bedding, riding gear, or seat, defiled by man with a discharge. If any of these items is lifted, it defiles the person who lifted them together with his garments. And that the aspect of lifting is like the same concept of mishkav, to sitting than riding. Verse 11. Whoever the man with the discharge touches, without having rinsed his hands, shall immerse his garments and immerse himself in the water, and he shall become unclean until the evening. So Rashi says, whoever the man with the discharge touches without having rinsed his hands, what does it mean? Well, the man with the discharge has not yet immersed himself. That's what it means. The man has not gone to the mikveh for whatever reason. He hasn't gone to the mikveh. And he had the discharge, let's say, a month ago. Doesn't make a difference. Until he goes to the mikveh, he's impure. And even if the discharge exceeds, and the man counts 7 days, as long as he has not yet immersed himself in the mikveh, he defiles all of the aspects of his uncleanness. And the reason Scripture expresses the immersion of man discharge is rinsing your hand. See a lot of different ways that Torah talks about going to the mikveh and express itself in different ways to teach us that the hidden parts of the body, the mouth, are not required to be immersed. When you go to the mikveh, you don't have to open your mouth. Hold your mouth open so that the water goes in your mouth. The mikveh is only for things that are like your hands that you see. Only the uncovered parts of the body like the hand. And that's why the Torah over here uses the words "L'rachas b'mayim" of his hands to teach us a lesson, teach us not a law. That mikveh is about the revealed parts of the body. The man or the woman, when they go to the mikveh, they don't have to hold their mouths open to make sure the water goes into their mouth, or make sure the water goes into other parts of the body. They have to just go to parts of the body that are seen. Verse 12. And an earthware. This is now we go. A zav is an avatuma. If a zav touches any earthenware, yishave, you have to break the earthenware, destroy all the, because you cannot rectify earthenware for the purity. Any wooden vessel shall be rinsed in water. Actually, one might think that even if he touches from the outside of the vessel, it also becomes unclean. However, the conclusion of the Medrash is that earthenware vessel cannot be defiled only by the entry of an unclean object in the inner space, as it's taught in Keres Kainim. The passage there continues. So if the verse indeed is referring to entry into the inner space of the earthenware vessel, why does it use the expression of touching? As in this passage concludes, well, what touching is referred to here? When he touches the whole vessel. And what does that mean? When he moves it, meaning in addition to the case of the entry into the inner space, if a man with a discharge moves a vessel, it becomes impure. So he needs to, over here, it means he picks it up, not just touches. If you touch an earthen vessel from the outside, an earthen vessel only becomes impure from the inside. That's a general law of impurity by an earthen vessel. An earthen vessel only can become impure when the guy put his hand inside the vessel. But there's also the earthen vessel can become impure, like when you pick it up, or as you learned before, picking up something will make anything impure. Lifting something, carrying something. Verse number 13. The man with a discharge is cleansed of his discharge. So that's what we have, a zayv and also a zava, man and female. When it comes to a discharge, so a balkari goes to the mikveh and he's pure by night. It means a man has a similar discharge. He's impure until the night. He goes to the mikveh and becomes pure. A woman that has a nida also will become pure the second she stops her menstrual cycle. She goes to the mikveh at night. The law of a zayv and a zava, they have to count 7 days. The safa shiva sham, they have to count, even when they stop the discharge, whenever they stop, they have to count 7 days. The safa shiva terasa, they have to count 7 days of his purity. Oh, here we talk about a zayv, a man. We'll get to a woman in the next reading. So a man counts 7 days. The chibas begadav, and then he goes to the mikveh. Berachas b'sar b'mayim, b'mayim chayim, in a living spring water, which is the mikveh. B'tar, and he becomes. So now she says, when he seizes, Shivas Yom Terasri, 7 clean days. This is where the law of 7 clean days come in, as you'll soon see by a woman too, with 7 clean days, which we do today. When a woman has a menstrual cycle, she counts 7 clean days after she stops. So she has a hefsek tara, she makes sure that she's not bleeding, and then she counts 7 days, and she goes then to the mikveh. So Shivas Yimei Torah. It's very important to realize that the stopping day is not counted as the day of the 7 days. The stopping day needs to make sure that by sunset it's not, you don't have any it stopped to bleed, and then the next day starts the first day of the 7 days. So that's the law. So 7 clean days of the uncleanness of this. It always starts at night. Always starts at night. The day always starts at night before. So 7 clean days will always start at the night before. He must not see any discharge during these 7 days. And all of them must be consecutive without any interruption. You have to have 7 clean days. If suddenly you had a discharge. Now you have to start again the 7 clean days. You have to have 7 consecutive clean days. You cannot have 2 days unclean and then start counting again and connect it to the previous 2 days. This is the law also by Anida and the law of Ovid. She has to have 7 consecutive clean days. He has to have 7 consecutive clean days. He must not see a discharge during all these 7 days. And all of them must be consecutive without any interruptions of a discharge during these 7 days. For a Zava, you have to bring a carbon. For a Zayv, you have to bring a carbon, not for Balkeri. So the higher level, Balkeri doesn't have to bring a carbon, but a Zayv has to bring a carbon. On the 8th day, shall take them 2 turtle doves and 2 young doves. And he brings it before God to the temple. Verse 15. The first one will be a carbon chatas, and one of them will be in the burnt offering. And the kohen will bring forgiveness of Hashem before God, from his discharge. Zoivai is a concept of a discharge. It means a discharge that's not usual. Not a usual kind of a discharge from this man. We're talking again, this law is talking about a man and not a woman. We'll get to a woman, I believe, tomorrow. The Gemara, the Torah will go into the law of a woman. But right now we learned the law of a man, who becomes a Zoif. Again, these are very difficult laws and extremely intricate laws, but these are the laws of impurity of a man. And that's why Chassidim always go to the mikveh every day, to David, for that reason, to take away impurity, because mikveh, as you see in the Torah, mikveh takes away impurity by anybody, by a man or a woman. So even though it doesn't take away some levels of impurity, it doesn't take away, or even if it takes away impurity, you need to have a carbon, as this guy needs a carbon. So even if a person would have a zoiv today, he would still need a carbon, which he cannot bring today, because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. But the concept of a mikveh still stands till today. We have the laws of a mikveh, which bring purity to the Jewish people. So we're in the middle of chapter 40, I believe, of the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe, it's something the Alter Rebbe, today's Chitas is a note. The following note, the Alter Rebbe states that the revelation of divine will in a particular world, caused by the ascent of the mitzvah, of Torah mitzvah thereto, a revelation which he describes as an hour of divine will or divine favor, produces a reaction in the midas of that world. Remember, we have, the Alter Rebbe explained that there's the concept of the world, and then there's the midas of the world, the 10 manifestations of the world. So with the revelation of divine will, the midas fuse with an attribute of severity are sweetened or tempered with kindness. This in turn results in the increased flow of divine kindness into our world. This effect of mitzvahs is felt primarily in the fusion of midas of Atzilus. So it'd be a little Kabbalistic. So the Alter Rebbe says, when a Jew does learn Torah in this world, what happens when he does? He brings down a light of God within the midas of the world. He said, explain that if I do with kavana, the first level of kavana, I infuse the world of bria, the world of creation. I infuse the light of God within the midas of the world of creation. If I do Torah just because of natural kavana, natural love of God, then I bring about a revelation of godness in the world of formation. Where does this godness come from? Where does this light come from? Everything comes from the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation. So ultimately what that means is my action in this world, my kavana in this world, whether it's a higher kavana or lower kavana, my kavana in this world, my intention, my thought process in this world brings about a light in the upper worlds, and infuses an energy, a godly energy that is revealed even ultimately in the world of Atzilus. There in the higher worlds, there's also shines forth and is revealed the supernal union. Just like I'm doing it here for the sake of the union. Remember I said, Hashem Yichud, I'm doing it here for Kavana. That's the Kavana. The thought process is, I'm doing it for the union of God and the world, Eir and Keli. I'm doing it for the concept of the fusion of the Eir with the vessel. It happens that Lamaila. It happens that above. Nasa b'chol mitzvah talmud. It happens in every mitzvah and in every learning of Torah. Shu yichud midaisi yisbarach, namely the union of God's midas. What does it mean, the union of God's midas? God's attributes. Shenichle zu bezu. The midas fuse with each other. And what happens with the midas? Again, when we talk about midas, there are 6 midas, right? And one of the 7th is Malchus. But one of the 2 main midas is Ava and Yira. Those are the 2 main midas in the world, in these worlds. Ava and Yira. Just like in the intellectuals, Chachma and Bina, in the emotional world is Ava and Yira. Chesed and Gevura. If we don't fuse them together, then Chesed is separate and Gevura is separate. And then when you have Gevura separate, you can have negative come out of it. We need to bring things together in this world. By fusing together, by bringing our light through our mitzvahs and through our Torah in this world, just like we fuse together Chesed and Gevura in this world, so too we fuse them together in the spiritual world. And what do you have by that? What you call Hamtakas Hagvuras, the sweetening of severity. Everything is good. Everything comes from God, whether it's Chesed, whether it's Gevura. But we want to have Gevura in a sweet way. And by doing over here, by in this world, by fusing together, bringing together Chesed and Gevura in this world, sweetness and judgment. That means we're doing something, that's judgment. But we'll bring together Ava and Gevura together in this world, we sweeten the Gevura Slamaila. We sweeten the severity above. It's sweet mechseches, the attribute of kindness. Through the hour of will favor of the blessed and safe. Which the revelation of will of the Ein Sof, which shines forth and reveals itself in abundant and intense revelation. How does that happen? How does that awaken up the will of God, so to say, to sweeten up the severity? Besarusa de la tata, by the reason of the arousal of man from below, human from below. Yasiyas mitzvahs is by us doing a mitzvah, or to learn Torah, shebehem meluvish datin aliyah, which in this mitzvah and this learning of Torah is clothed itself, the supernal God, the Ratzin, the will of God, which is Ein Sof, it's unlimited. So the revelation of the will and will clothe itself in Torah mitzvah produces a fusion of midas and sweetening of gevuris, or whatever world the Torah mitzvah is sent to. Where does it all start from? The main cause by Torah mitzvahs takes place in the world of emanation. That's where it all starts from. It all starts on in the world of Atzilus. Where the core and the essence of God's mitzvahs are united with their emanator, the Matzilon, with the one who created them. Who created midas? Who created the attribute of kindness and severity. God ain't Sefer. So over there in the world of Atzilus is where you have the real fusion and the real concept of unity of God's attributes. And there is found the core and the essence, the supernal will of God. But only a mere glimmer of that. So it all happens in the world of Atzilus. And a mere glimmer of that shines in the world of creation. And ultimately into the world of formation. And ultimately in the world of action. Each one according to his capability. So this is the power of learning Torah. Now we bring about a great unity lamaila, all the way in the world of emanation. We bring about the fusion between Chesed and Gevurah in the world of emanation, which shines forth in the world of creation, which brings about the unity in the world of formation, which creates a unity in the world of action. And it all started from me and you, sitting here and learning Torah together. Even though all of us sitting over here and learning Torah, even though we do not come from the world of Atzilus, we come from a much lower level from the world, maybe even the world of Yetzirah, from the world of formation, most of us from the world of action. So how do we have that power? The Alter Rebbe says it doesn't make a difference where you come from. It's what you're doing that's important. If I sit over here, we're sitting here learning Torah, that is the will of God. This is what's happening. By us learning Torah, sitting here and doing the mitzvah, us doing a mitzvah. We're doing a mitzvah of learning Torah. So by us doing the mitzvah, which is the Ratzon of the Eibishter, and learning Torah, which is the wisdom of God. So it's not important where I come from. It's important where the Ratzon came from. The Ratzon for this learning, the will of this learning, the will of this mitzvah came all the way from the world of Atzilus. And that is this, what I'm learning, we're learning. Right now, this is in the learning that we are learning. The main difference that we are very low. Our souls come from a very low level of the worlds above, but we're doing the Ratzon of the Eibishter. We are doing the Ratzon, the will, and the desire of God, which God gave us a mitzvah to learn Torah. And that desire and that will is happening right now. So therefore, that will, that desire reaches up all the way to the world of emanation. Who will because that will and that desire is God. Because him and his will is one. You can't separate. By human being, you can separate him from his will. But you cannot separate God's will and him. So while you're us sitting together right now and learning Torah, we are doing God's will because he asked us to learn Torah every day. We are doing mitzvah of the Eibishter. That is God's will, and we are learning the wisdom of God. And God and his will is one, and God and his wisdom is one. And this supernal will is actually the source of the midas, since it was by his will that he emanates his midas, which is united with himself. Therefore, by the means of revelation of his will, caused by one engaging in Torah or in a particular mitzvah, the midas fuse, eat with each other. This is what's happening. Right now, it's happening by us sitting here and learning Torah because we want to do God's will, to learn Torah every single day. And we're sitting here together right now, and we're doing God's will to learn Torah. to the best of our capacity, to the best that we can understand. What's happening now is God's Ratzon is being revealed all the way in the world of Atzilus. His Ratzon is being revealed. His desire is being accomplished. And that's being a fusion in the world of Atzilus, in the world of emanation. And that world is flooding with light of God in that world, which is bringing about a unity between all the midos of God. And that, by us learning right now, we are bringing about a fusion between chesed and gevurah, between kindness and severity. And we're having hamtakas hagvuras. We're having the sweetening of the severity. And that trickles down to the world of Bria. And that trickles down to the world of creation. And that trickles down to the world of emanation, with the world of formation. That trickles down to the world of creation. And ultimately, that trickles down to each and every single one of us. That we have hamtakas hagvuras. We have the sweetening of severity in this world. Hamtakas hagvuras b'chadim, and the gevuras are sweetened by chsadim in this hour of a revealed favorable will. This is the hour that we are learning here right now. That we have now sat and learned the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We've done the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to learn. And we have learned the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which both of them are one and his midas are one. And therefore, we have brought about a fusion in the upper worlds. And ultimately, by bringing a fusion between God and his midas, and bringing a fusion between God's midas itself, his attribute itself, between chesed and gevurah, it ultimately trickles down to this world. And that completes the Tanya of today. Today is the 6th day of the month. And the Tillim of today is chapter 35 to chapter 38. 35, 36, 37, 38. If you do those 4 chapters of Tillim, you would have done the chitas of the day. I want to invite you all to come at 10 a.m. We're going to have a class in the portion of the week, the Rebbe's Sikha for the week. Everybody's welcome at 10 o'clock to come to Chabad, or to come on this Zoom number, or to come at this Torah Direct Facebook page, and you can be part of this wonderful class. I wish you all a wonderful and beautiful and happy day. And Mitzvah, I'll see you all tomorrow, 8 a.m. We'll continue the Chitas.